Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can.
President Obama's farewell address, a review of what he hopes will be his legacy. And the president-elect holds his first news conference, promising to take away one of Obama's crowning achievements, affordable health care.
It'll be repeal and replace.
This is the Emmy Award-winning 11 News Close-Up with your host, Marvin Scott.
Good morning, everyone. In just 5 days, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. At his first post-election news conference on Wednesday, he laid out some of the priorities he'll take on during his initial days in office, including naming his choice for the Supreme Court, immediate action to repeal and replace Obamacare, and plans to jumpstart building that wall along the Mexican border. While Trump was holding his first combative news conference with reporters, President Obama was engaged in one of his last public appearances as Commander-in-Chief, delivering his farewell address. This morning, we're going to hear what our political gurus have to say about our outgoing and incoming presidents. And good to have with us this morning Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College, and she's strategy advisor for applied techonomics. Morgan Peckma, executive director of the think tank Effective New York and co-host of Effective Radio on 970 AM, and Democratic strategist Hank Scheinkopf. Glad to have you all with us. And before we begin our discussion, Greg Treadway has some details of President Obama's final impassioned message to the American people.
You were the change. You answered people's hopes. And because of you, by almost every measure, America is a better, stronger place than it was when we started.
Speaking to a packed house in Chicago, the president reflected on his triumphs over the past 8 years.
If I had told you that we would open up a new chapter with the Cuban people, shut down Iran's nuclear weapons program without firing a shot, take out the mastermind of 9/11, if I had told you that we would win marriage equality and secure the right to health insurance for another 20 million of our fellow citizens, you might have said our sights were set a little too high.
He also pledged a peaceful transition of power.
I committed to President-elect Trump that my administration would ensure the smoothest possible transition, just as President Bush did for me.
But the strongest moments of the speech were saved for his family, who received a standing ovation. First, his wife.
You took on a role you didn't ask for, and you made it your own, with grace and with grit and with style and good humor. You have made me proud, and you have made the country proud.
Finally, a message to the man who stood beside him through it all, Vice President Joe Biden.
You were the first decision I made as a nominee, and it was the best.
The president wrapped up his speech asking the American people to do one thing as we move forward, to believe in the ability to bring about change.
Our thanks to Craig Treadway for that report. So, guys, it seemed heartfelt and quite emotional. What was your impression?
I thought it was very emotional towards the end, as Craig mentioned, the comments about his wife and his children. And I don't think we've ever seen a president and a vice president quite as close as we have seen Joe Biden and Barack Obama. But beyond that, I thought he had a really interesting series of statements, not just, reiterating his successes, of which there are many, but also some of the warnings he laid out. And I was particularly moved by the discussion about the threat to democracy from racism, because I think it's something that people have heard from President Obama in the past, but I thought it was a very important statement for him to make as the outgoing first African-American president.
Yeah, well, certainly, President Obama has done so much for African Americans in this country, and he was as much fighting to reflect upon his legacy as to preserve his legacy, which the incoming president seems very determined to unravel. So, what will be the ultimate effect of President Obama upon our history will be very much determined by the next president.
What do you think, Hank?
historians determine what we'll think in the future. When all of us are gone, there'll be a lot about this guy because he was the first. And by the way, he was the guy who did what others couldn't do, which is to create real socialized medicine in this country for more people. Very significant. It is an emotional moment. It is an important transition moment for America. But the most important thing I think he said to people was participate. Part of our crisis and the reason why we're having the chaos we're having is due to a lack of participation in the most basic community levels. And he talked about that. Very important.
Evaluating one's accomplishments can be a very subjective matter. Now, he laid out his accomplishments. Would you agree with what he laid out as his top priorities, his top achievements?
His top achievements, certainly, and I think some of them he doesn't get enough credit for. The opening of Cuba, you know, the Iran nuclear deal, the obviously healthcare, as Hank just mentioned. I mean, the list goes on and on. There were some things he promised to do that he wasn't able to achieve, and certainly gun control, I think, is top among those, and it's something that he's talked an awful lot about. So I do think he's got a number of achievements to point to. He was there 8 years, but as Morgan mentioned, I think the real difficulty for Barack Obama at this point is he is watching so many of those potentially be unraveled. Speaking of racism, we just saw Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey get up for the first time and suggest that a sitting colleague, a sitting senator in Jeff Sessions, should not be the Attorney General designee because he does not have a strong track record when it comes to race. And so you look down the line at some of his accomplishments, and some of those are going to be unraveled, or certainly they're going to try hard.
Just in the last few months, President Obama has had extraordinary accomplishments in conservation and environmental protection. That's another area where President Trump, who seems very skeptical about climate science, will try to unravel what President Obama has tried to put in place. And we have to remember the context in which President Obama assumed the White House. In the wake of the fiscal crisis, we were in economic shambles, and he was able to really pull us back from the brink. And now he leaves office 8 years later with a largely scandal-free White House, with high approval ratings, largely, by all metrics, successful presidency.
He brought unemployment when he came in was at 10%. I think it's now 4.5%, and he's put about 75 million people back to work.
I mean, it is really extraordinary what the turnaround we've seen, and it seemed effortless to the public, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves.
The auto industry working again.
Absolutely.
Okay? Restructured with American taxpayers repaid in most cases. The Wall Street chaos brought to some conclusion, and what you're witnessing is a reversal. Why? If you look at the people that Trump is now bringing into government, many of them were there when the financial system of this country and the world was about to collapse.
You were talking about historians before. How do you think historians in years ahead are going to rate him? Good, adequate?
They're going to rate him good. They're going to say domestically he was very good, and internationally he was not so good, and that will be the big difference.
What do you think,
if you look
Morgan?
at Russia, the fact that the balance of power in the world has shifted exponentially. The Chinese are running around using the North Koreans as a weapon against the United States and the rest of the world. Europe and NATO and the European community are in very serious trouble. That's the bad news. The good news is domestic politics and what he did.
I mean, I think on the foreign policy front, there are so many things that are dangling that have yet to be determined, like how is it going to play out in the South China Sea. It's a little bit hard now to evaluate President Obama's legacy there, but on the domestic front, certainly very well. I think that he will be held up as a very strong, if not great, president by history.
Before we go to break, what do you think?
I think he's going to be held up strong. I mean, I think one of the things we forget is in the modern presidency, very few presidents leave office with as high approval ratings as Barack Obama enjoys.
55%.
55%. It is remarkable when you consider that, because you look at the end of two-term presidencies in the modern presidency, they are usually much lower. So that is a feat in and of itself. Now, whether that translates into how historians view him is another question. But as Morgan mentioned, also a scandal-free presidency, and we forget how unusual that is. And we may be facing something different.
This is the largest vote getter in American history, and people should remember that no matter how they feel about him personally.
And he did better in his second term, which I think is very unusual.
That's very important.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the incoming president, Donald Trump. We'll be right back. President-elect Trump held his first news conference since the election on Wednesday. He talked about divesting himself from his business interests, about his agenda once he moves into the Oval Office, and he used the occasion to shoot back at his detractors in the media. Mario Diaz has a recap.
I have great respect for the news and great respect for freedom of the press and all of that.
Less than an hour after President-elect Donald Trump touted the freedom of the press at his first news conference since being elected, Trump found himself here.
No, not you. Not you. Your organization's terrible. Your organization's terrible.
While denying one journalist from CNN the freedom to ask a question, President-elect Trump did praise some media organizations for not fully acknowledging the validity of a Russian intelligence dossier that emerged on Tuesday night. A report by a former Russian intelligence officer who was commissioned by Republican operatives during the GOP primary that allegedly painted some embarrassing images of Trump inside of a Moscow hotel.
I read what was released, and I think it's a disgrace. I think it's an absolute disgrace.
When asked who may have released this confidential information, the president-elect did not hold back in stating that the feds may potentially have been involved.
Maybe the intelligence agencies. Who knows? But maybe the intelligence agencies.
Various topics were covered. From the wall with Mexico.
Mexico will pay for the wall, but it'll be reimbursed.
To Trump relinquishing all control to his companies.
These papers are just some of the many documents that I've signed, turning over complete and total control.
To repealing and replacing Obamacare simultaneously.
Will most likely be on the same day or the same week, but probably the same day, could be the same hour.
To, of course, relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
If Putin likes Donald Trump, guess what, folks? That's called an asset, not a liability.
And while the president-elect did acknowledge that he believes Russia did hack the DNC.
I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people.
It was this exchange with CNN's Jim Acosta over the network's reporting of the allegations that had surfaced in the intelligence community that generated this explosive exchange.
Can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You are
is
attacking
terrible.
our news organization.
Your organization
Can you give
is
us a
terrible.
chance
Let's
to
go.
ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can
Quiet.
you state,
Quiet.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
can you state categorically,
She's asking a question. Don't
Mr.
be
President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No, I'm
give
not
us a
going to give you a
question?
question. I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not
Go
appropriate.
ahead.
Thanks to Mario Diaz for that report. Is there any better reality television than a Trump news conference? What do you guys think?
He's got to be kidding. Look, all this is going to do is gin up more activity by reporters to go after him because they don't like one of their own singled out. On the other side, the press's credibility is seriously in jeopardy, and he's made a point of that throughout his campaign. You can't just print stories or run stories that have no verification. And doing that in this case only exacerbated an existing very difficult situation.
It was extremely irresponsible of BuzzFeed to release that completely unconfirmed, unverified dossier that hadn't even been drawn up by an intelligence agency, but by people who are working in a private capacity, and that really undermined the ability of the press to punch back against Donald Trump's assault against the media. It is unconscionable how the president-elect treated the media in that press conference. It really threatens the power of the media in this country, the ability for the media to hold the president accountable, and yet the press found itself on its heels because of what BuzzFeed did.
Is this an indication of the way he's going to treat the media during his administration?
It absolutely is. I mean, Donald Trump knows how to play the antagonist card very well. The media has worked effectively as a villain for him to paint, and he's going to continue doing that. But right now, he can make promises and put forward policies that are ephemeral. But once the proof is in the pudding, then he'll be in a very different standing.
I have to say, I think that BuzzFeed's release of the dossier and CNN's reporting on it the night before was a gift to Donald Trump, because it allowed him to go into this press conference as the victim, and it took the focus and the onus away from what we should have been talking about, which was the way he has designed this ethics issue, and it is very, very problematic, from issues involving the Supreme Court and the Affordable Care Act and all the other policies, and it put it right where Donald Trump wants it to be, which is the big bad media has somehow done something wrong. And as Morgan mentioned, BuzzFeed should never have released it, but it played right into his hands. And on the ethics issue, I would just say the bulk of the press conference was supposed to be focused on that, and a good amount of time was spent on it. And if you look at what he's done, it is incredibly problematic. He is not setting up a blind trust. He is not getting an independent trustee. He is maintaining ownership. He's just stepping away away from operations. All of those things are incredibly problematic when you talk to legal people and people who do ethics. It's going to create an entanglement that's going to be very difficult for him to maneuver around.
How do you see that playing out, his failure to fully divest himself of his business interests?
I mean, the circus nature of the press conference really undercuts what the real takeaways are from this, right? He has not really proposed any viable solution to disentangle himself from his business. All the ethics experts say that this is not a solution that protects him from conflicts of interest. He says Mexico is going to reimburse us for the wall. President Nieto of Mexico says there's no way that's happening, and we have seen no indication that's going to happen. He's going to get rid of Obamacare and immediately replace it. The Republicans in Congress themselves say it would take at least a month to 3 months for that to happen, and I believe that's optimistic. So everything that he's saying is just smoke and mirrors at this point, and we'll see, whether he's able to do any of those things, which appears highly unlikely.
This is all, in fact, true, but we're missing the point. What we do know about populism and populists is that they put themselves into power by identifying themselves as enacting the will of the people. Every attack on Donald Trump, who now is the representative of the people who elected him, or not in Los Angeles and not in New York, but in the heartland, is going to make the people who elected him feel much better because their power is instilled in him, and they're not going to be paying attention to the media. They're not going to be paying attention to critics. They're not going to be paying attention to good government people. They're going to see that Donald Trump, who promised to get things the way they used to be, is being interfered with. That's the difference.
Let's talk briefly about the confirmation hearings. Now, we're taping this broadcast on Thursday, so we don't know what's going to happen the rest of the day or on Friday, but it's unlikely that we're going to be completed with these confirmation, particularly for the Attorney General and for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. A lot of controversy surrounding it. Cory Booker has come out and opposed to Jeff Sessions as Attorney General because of his civil rights record. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah,
these are the two big confirmation hearings to watch. There's more obviously coming down the pike, but I think, in the particular the Secretary of State, he's probably going to get through. I think Hank may disagree with me, but I think he may narrowly get through, but it's going to be very, very tough. And he has real questions, and this Russian focus is not helping him. And Jeff Sessions as well, to see for the first time a sitting senator and Cory Booker to take on his colleague on the issue of civil rights. It was a very moving end to that session yesterday when he stood up with his colleagues from Congress and said, this is not the man who should be running the Justice Department.
Senator Sessions has learned a lot since he was failed to be confirmed for the federal judgeship 20 years ago. I mean, everyone knows you can go into these Senate confirmation hearings, promise everybody the moon and the stars, play the role of the moderate, and get into office and do whatever you want, which is exactly what Senator Sessions intends to do. I was surprised by how Rex Tillerson really fumbled the ball there, that he didn't come in with the answers that he knew that everybody wanted to hear, and he got cornered, and it was surprising how poorly he did.
The Senate is not going to go in the tank. They have to somehow prove their independence, even though Trump is of the same party, and they've got to put Trump on notice. Now, if they do not confirm someone, that notice is pretty clear. But if they do, with tremendous intensity, maybe President Trump will understand that the Senate, some of them run for re-election in 2 years. If they appear not to be independent, they're going to have problems getting reelected.
Well, you're dealing now with the Secretary of State. Now, Marco Rubio, I think the Republicans have a one-vote margin in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee.
Rubio's going to. It looks right now, although this may change. You don't know what conversations are going on telephones. That Rubio will not be voting for confirmation, and if that is the case, and one more shows up, and it might be, the usual gang of suspects. Democrats don't matter. It'll be another Republican who thinks the institution needs to be protected as a warning to Trump. Then he won't get there.
Quick question: do you think Tillerson will be
50-50 at best?
I think that he probably will be.
I think that he probably will be. It's going to be tight.
What about Senator Sessions for Attorney General?
I think Sessions is going to get through, but I think more important is what happens after in both of these cases. I think they both get through, but I think it's going to be real questions that the Democrats and some Republicans have laid down.
I think Sessions will sail through.
Sessions is an easy one. Senators aren't going to stab each other.
Okay, again, we're talking on Thursday. Anything can happen between now and the time of this broadcast on Sunday, but we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. A lot of pomp and circumstance will surround Friday's inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States. It's a tradition that began with George Washington 228 years ago.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower,
John Fitzgerald Kennedy,
Gerald R. Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan,
George Herbert Walker Bush,
William Jefferson Clinton,
George Walker Bush,
Barack Hussein Obama.
The names have changed, but the tradition has not. It is one that has endured for 220 years, since George Washington was sworn in as our first president at Federal Hall in New York, then the nation's capital. The traditions established by Washington have remained unchanged. The use of a Bible when taking the oath of office, reading an inaugural address, attending a gala ball. Washington envisioned the pomp and circumstance as a celebration of democracy. Inaugurals shifted to the Capitol with Thomas Jefferson and were originally held in March.
They moved the transition from March to January after Hoover and Roosevelt had a poor time of it, so in 1937 it became the date we use today, January 20th.
In 1937, Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in for his second term. He took office 4 years earlier in the midst of the Great Depression. In his address, he tried to reassure the American people.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The oath of office mandated by the Constitution is simple. 35 words that clearly describe the responsibilities of the chief executive.
Do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office
of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
It was George Washington, not the authors of the Constitution, who ended the oath with 4 additional words.
So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God. So help me God. So help me God.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Washington added "so help me God" because he wanted to create a precedent without mandating those words.
Herbert Hoover, a Quaker, and Teddy Roosevelt reportedly chose other but similar words to conclude their oaths. Traditionally, inaugural ceremonies are held outside in front of the Capitol. Freezing weather forced Ronald Reagan inside in 1985, as it did 76 years earlier for William Howard Taft. There was a quiet swearing in for Harry Truman after the death of FDR, and for Gerald Ford after the resignation of Richard Nixon. Inaugural addresses usually set the tone for the new president's administration.
A great speech usually has a memorable line.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
While 4 presidents chose not to make speeches at all, George Washington gave the shortest at his second inaugural, 135 words in under 3 minutes.
William Henry Harrison had the longest. It was 8,000 words, 2 hours, and he died 30 days later.
There is a customary 21-gun salute after the swearing-in, and since Thomas Jefferson's second inaugural in 1805, it has become tradition for the president to join the parade down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol to the White House. And what's a celebration without a party, a ball? The tempo may have changed somewhat since George Washington danced the minuet following his inaugural in 1789, but the spirit certainly has not.
I'm loving you whether now, whether times are good or bad, happy or sad.
And Friday, inauguration of Donald Trump as 45th president. It's going to be quite a celebration, but minus some top celebrities who are boycotting the inauguration. So, final thoughts. What do you expect ahead in the next 4 years of Donald Trump?
I think in the first 100 days, we're going to be watching, I think in particular in my case, for the Supreme Court nominee, which he said at the press conference is going to be within 2 weeks.
No doubt a conservative.
No doubt a conservative.
You know, Hank made a fine point earlier about how Donald Trump was very successful in that press conference playing to his base, but now he's going to have to show people what he can do.
Successful presidents break with the past and do as much as they can, as quickly as they can in a sprint. That's Donald Trump's move.
Hank Shankoff, Morgan Peckma, Jeannie Zaino, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insight always. And that'll do it for our program for this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website at pix11.com/newscloseup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.